p.m. UTC, so I think we'll get the session started. Welcome everyone to the session 2 at ISS. My name is Frederick Broody and I'm the chair for this session. We have 5 super exciting presentations coming up. The first 3 are papers that are published in the PACM HCI ISS, and the last 2 are invited presentations of papers that were published in CHI this year and are highly relevant also to the ISS community. And I'm really excited about all 5 presentations. As a reminder how this session will be running, we're first hearing the 5 presentations, and I will introduce briefly each paper. And after the last presentation, we'll then have about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. And if you missed the opening plenary, then here's a quick recap of how that'll work. On Discord, you will find a category on the left, which is called Paper Session 2 Monday. And underneath that category, there's a channel for each paper. Please post your questions in the relevant channel, and one of our wonderful SVs will then collect the questions and pass them on to me, and I will be asking your questions at the end to all the presenters. Also, feel free to post any other questions you have there or any other issues and get directly in touch with the authors there as well. All right. So without further ado, we'll start with the first talk, which is FlexCR by Maria Jesus Lobo. And yeah, please go ahead.
So hello, thank you for watching my presentation and for the introduction. I will be talking about FlexCR, a platform to evaluate interaction techniques for immersive visualizations. So this was a work done jointly with Christophe Horter and Paul Girani. So extended reality groups augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality. And hardware supporting extended reality is becoming more affordable and have now powerful processors that enable rendering high-resolution images at high frame rates.
É assim. Já falei com eles todos. Há uns que partilham, outros não. Há só um que sou eu a lançar. O que é que eu tenho? Tenho o VLC preparado em full screen. E sou eu que vou fazer partilha de ecrã, VLC, siga. Mas falou, fez um chat privado.
Okay, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Okay. Immersive analytics use extended reality to visualize data. There are multiple studies that compare interaction techniques, visualizations, or devices for immersive analytics. However, these studies are often tied to specific hardware or software setup, thus they are hard to replicate. It's still a challenge to compare different devices for different visualizations or different tasks. And when a designer has to choose one tool, it's hard to decide which one because there are no clear design guidelines. So we introduced FlexCR, an environment to help design, share, and conducting user studies for immersive analytics based on abstract low-level tasks. So here we have a video of FlexCR. So FlexCR enables the pre-visualizing the visualization and the JSON and editing in the software. So the different designers can test the different conditions across different devices. And we use only one JSON to define all the conditions. So the JSON specification relies on 6 main components: the data, the visual marks to visualize the data, the devices, and the inputs, and the interaction techniques and the tasks. So the interaction techniques and the tasks are defined using state machines. So state machines in FlexCR receive signals coming from inputs and define different actions and transitions that enable to go from one state to another. So here we have an example for brushing. In this case, we wanted to emulate an abstract task to selecting in a scatter plot. So in this case, all the conditions are in the same JSON, and we will have 3 different conditions, one for each device. So we have the virtual reality headset, the HoloLens, and an iPad. So here we can see the final rendering for the virtual reality condition. In this case, the user points with the virtual reality controller and selects with the trigger of the virtual reality. Here we have the final rendering with the HoloLens. In this case, he points with the gaze and selects with the hairpins gesture. Finally, here we have the rendering with the iPad. He points with a ray coming from the center on the screen and selects by tapping the screen. We will now show a use case where a researcher is testing and linking tasks and debugging the experimental conditions. So he will use an example with two visualizations, and the participant has to first select a target in the source view, then one in the target view. Here is the rendering with the virtual reality headset. So he first selects in the source view and then in the target view. The researchers have also access to a state machine visualizations to enable them to understand how the interaction and task is working. So in this case, we have one state for the selection, for the interaction state machine that handles the selection, and two states in the task state machine, one that handles the selection in the source view and one that handles it in the target view. So he also can see the current measures being recorded as the participant plays the conditions. So in this case, we will have a measure that measures the time to select in the target view, and one that counts the number of errors, meaning the number of incorrect selections. So here we can see that when the task is being performed, the measures are not being recorded at the same time. So to correct this, the researcher goes back to the FlexCR interface, and in debug tag, he can see the different state machines. Once he selects an element in the state machine, the corresponding code will be highlighted. So when he selects the time, the measure representing the time, he sees that the state is the incorrect one, so he can correct it. To evaluate FlexCR, we conducted a user evaluation with 6 experts, 4 researchers and 4 research engineers working with immersive visualization using the walkthrough approach. Feedback was overall positive, but the users had some suggestions for improvement. For example, some of them had trouble understanding states and specification, and suggested adding some visual cues to facilitate the navigation. Others suggested being able to import 3D objects to be able to simulate real environments. Finally, one of them would have liked to be able to replay the conditions to gain further insights on users' behavior. Our approach presents some limitations. For example, the evaluation was limited to a walkthrough with only 6 participants. Further evaluations considering more participants and where the participants can use the system themselves could give us more insights about the usability of the system. Also, to keep the approach simple, we use only one state machine to handle the interaction and one to handle the task. This means we cannot handle very complex interaction. And finally, FlexCR was designed for pretty basic visualizations, so it does not scale yet to a big number of objects. More advanced rendering technique could be used to alleviate this problem. So we presented FlexCR, a platform to design and conduct user studies comparing devices, visualizations, or interaction techniques for immersive analytics. We hope that FlexCR will ease sharing and replicating those studies. So thank you for your attention. I will be waiting for your questions.
Great, thank you, Maria. Round of virtual applause. As a reminder, please post your question on Discord and we will get to answer them at the end of the session. Right, so next up is Daniele Mendez. Please, could you share your screen? And who will be presenting collaborative tabletops for blind people, a very exciting paper. And please, Daniel, go ahead.
Okay, just a minute. Okay, hello all. I am Daniele Mendez. I will be presenting our paper entitled Collaborative Tabletops for Blind People, the Effect of Auditory Design on Workspace Awareness. Tabletops have significant advantages in supporting multi-user interaction, namely due to their large shared surface. Also, tabletop geometry has been shown to encourage equitable participation among users, as well as simultaneous individual interactions with digital content. Previous research highlighted several benefits of using interactive tabletops, such as improving collaborative learning, enhancing social interaction, and fostering creativity and engagement, among others. However, people with visual impairments can struggle to engage with such large surfaces. We argue that not being able to use interactive tabletops and participate in these group activities, for example due to visual impairments, can be a vehicle of social exclusion. Despite being an inherently visual technology, touchscreen devices can be used by blind users. Screen readers, such as Apple's VoiceOver or Android's TalkBack, allow users to explore and control the device by providing audio feedback for touch actions. However, when considering the spatial awareness of interface elements, these accessibility services are mostly designed for smaller form factors, rather than large collaborative surfaces where the ability to locate items and establish relationships between them is more challenging. Examples of applications for such devices include exploring maps and anatomic models in educational settings, or mind maps in brainstorming sessions. In these, the ability to locate artifacts without losing spatial awareness and to relate them is relevant. While there is a large body of work on touchscreen accessibility, research has been restricted to single-user interaction. This raises the question of how accessibility services can support non-visual collaborative activities on large touchscreen devices. Namely, how can we inform users about the action of others? This notion of monitoring the activity of others, which provides context for one's activities, is defined as workspace awareness, which is a crucial aspect of collaboration and often relies on visual display techniques. However, little is known about using audio for tabletop multi-user interaction, particularly on how to provide workspace awareness and support blind people in joint activities. In this work, we present a study that contributes to the understanding of auditory design in enabling non-visual collaboration in large touchscreen surfaces. Our main goal was to understand how the amount of auditory information affects both information exchange about workspace awareness and task performance. To this end, we designed and implemented a non-visual tabletop prototype that can be customized to provide different auditory feedback modes. It consists of an interactive tabletop, 2 Bluetooth stereo headphones, and a pair of death cameras. It provides users with a unique text-to-speech voice to support collaboration. Each user is assigned a different voice, either male or female, as audio frequency is a good parameter to maximize speech discrimination. Furthermore, use specialized speech to display target positions on the tabletop. In terms of collaborative work, the specialized feedback implicitly illustrates the screen areas being explored by partners, thus increasing the potential to increase workspace awareness. We investigated 3 auditory feedback modes, which employ different trade-offs between privacy and visibility of the user's information. Private behaves similarly to a traditional screen reader, as speech feedback is restricted to users' own actions. In the public, users receive audio feedback about their own actions, as well as the actions of partners. For the task dependent, in addition to their own actions, users receive feedback about their partner's actions that are relevant for the collaborative task. Since tabletops excel in conveying 2D spatial relations, we chose the fundamental task of exploring the screen and selecting targets. We had 3 types of targets: squares, circles, and triangles. We asked pairs of participants to select all squares and circles. Triangles were distractors and simulated irrelevant interface elements. A participant could only select either squares or circles, and participants were given a maximum of 7 and 5 minutes to complete the task with distractors and without distractors, respectively. We recruited 10 participants in 5 pairs. They were recruited from a local social institution, and their ages ranged from 20 to 59 years old. All were legally blind and had daily experience with touchscreen mobile phones and consequently had experience with VoiceOver or TalkBack. None had previous experience with tabletop displays. Regarding task performance, all pairs successfully completed all tasks within the time limit. The statistical analysis of task completion time revealed no significant differences between conditions, suggesting that although public mode delivers irrelevant auditory information, users can filter it out and maintain task efficiency. Regarding workspace awareness information exchanges, we did not find a significant main effect of either feedback mode or distractors. However, we did find a significant interaction between factors, suggesting that the public feedback mode is more sensitive to distractors than the private mode, increasing the total information exchanges. Also, participants supplied significantly more information to each other than requested in the private and public conditions. We also registered examples of co-located non-visual collaboration behaviors, namely how workspace awareness information was both supplied and extracted, and how participants coordinated strategies. Participants often supplied relevant target location information to their partners as soon as they found it and used various nonverbal behaviors that supplemented verbal instructions. These included datic references, audible tapping on the tabletop, leaving the finger as reference point, and retrieving the partner's hands. To retrieve location information, participants used two main strategies. They either reacted to the spatialized feedback or offered their hand so that their partner could guide them. Regarding coordinating strategies, only one pair prearranged a strategy to find all targets efficiently. The strategy was based on divide and conquer. The remaining strategies emerged from individual behaviors. Individualists adopted a strategy of prioritizing selecting their own targets, and an over-helper participant opted for sharing all information without much care of its relevance, which sometimes seemed to have a negative effect on the partner. There were also physical information exchanges. Physical contact was widely advantageous to exchange information about target location and complement datic references. However, we also observed several cases where participants' screen explorations resulted in unintentional physical contact, which can encompass negative consequences. Based on our results and observations, we were able to devise a set of implications that can be useful for interaction designers targeting multi-user screen readers, particularly for tabletop interaction. So, there should be a focus on information sensitivity, reducing on-screen content, considering interaction on and above the tabletop, providing awareness about the other user, making datic expressions meaningful, and using multiple taps wisely. So, this concludes our presentation, and thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you very much, Daniel. Really exciting work. Another round of applause, please, for Daniel. I'm sure he will be able to hear it. Thank you. All right, let's swiftly move on to the next presentation, which is Autogrip by Gareth Barnes. And we will be playing his video, but he will be able.
Hello, my name is Gareth Barnes. I'm here presenting Autogrip, a project from my PhD that I've worked on alongside my supervisor, Dr. Anne Rodale. I'm going to introduce our project with our video. So, why did we build Autogrip? I've been working with force feedback technology for a number of years, and as part of my work I do a lot of public engagement and demonstrations, specifically with fingertip feedback. Force feedback robots can use thimbles, a small cup, to connect a device to a fingertip. Typical designs are pretty effective from a haptic perspective, although they suffer some problems in specific scenarios. One problem is that the human form is quite inconsistent. Finger sizes vary a lot amongst people. So any thimble based on springs or elastics will apply more pressure to a larger finger and less pressure to a smaller finger. And this is a problem, as pressure from the thimble will stimulate or can even saturate tactile receptors in the skin. Some thimbles get around this by either having different sized attachments for different sized fingers, or by instead using manually adjustable mechanisms such as Velcro straps. But these manually adjustable mechanisms suffer their own problems in that they're quite cumbersome and impractical, especially when you're dealing with multiple point systems, and even more so if they're bimanual systems. In multiple user applications, it's still very impractical to swap between different sized attachments. In my case, if I'm showing a 2-minute demo, taking a minute to swap attachments between users is a lot of time and work. It also affects many people's first impressions of a force feedback system. People don't want to wait for a minute while the demonstrator measures their finger and refits the machine. So, we wanted a thimble that could be easily and rapidly attached to any finger, and that's why we designed Autogrip. Autogrip consists of two parts, the thimble itself and the separate actuator module. Separating the two means that the thimble itself can be very light. This is good for reducing mechanical inertia, and also very small, which is good for multiple.
All right, thank you very much, Gareth. And as I mentioned before, he will be available for Q&A later, so please post your questions on Discord. Next up, we have a special invited talk from Kai. Constantie Klemker didn't get to present this year at Kai, so we have invited him to present at ISS. As a small announcement, Constantine will finish his PhD next year and is already looking forward to new job opportunities. So also please do get in touch with him on Discord or send him an email. And also, I believe their work received an honorable mention award at Kai. So a round of virtual applause for that as well. And they have published their work as open access, and I believe Raimund Daxelt has already shared a link on Discord to the website. And without further ado, Constantine, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thanks for the nice introduction, Frederick, and also big thanks to the ISS program chairs for inviting me. My name is Constantie Klemker, and today it's my pleasure to present our project, Rapid Iron-On User Interfaces. This research was published this year and is joint work with Raimund Daxelt from the Interactive Media Lab Dresden and Jürgen Steimle from the HCI lab at Saarland University. So if we look at current trends of e-textiles, we see an increasing amount of emerging application use cases. However, the manual fabrication of e-textile interfaces on the yarn level is quite time-consuming and cumbersome. So an important question is how technology enthusiastic makers and innovative designers could take part in this development. To address these challenges, a lot of research has been done in crafting e-textiles or developing modular wearable toolkits, investigating advanced fabrication and sensing approaches, as well as creating cuttable smart tapes. In addition, interactive fabrication approaches focus on sequential or concurrent processes, where the design and the fabrication process take place almost at the same time. These approaches often involve interactive handheld design tools. For instance, Sketch and Stitch combines the design of components by sketching and the fabrication by using an automated embroidery machine. But how can we design a handheld tool that allows to directly apply a variety of e-textile components onto textiles? Inspired by the sketching-like interaction or handheld correction tape or packaging tape dispenser, we introduce Rapid Iron-On User Interfaces, a novel fabrication technique to combine design and fabrication into one single process. Therefore, we developed a handheld ironing tool that directly transfers adhesive functional tapes and patches onto fabrics. The device uses an iron that could be pushed for bonding tapes via heat activation, and the tapes itself are rolled on spools with a carrier layer. As you can see in the video, it is possible to iron a single trace in a sketching-like fashion by pushing and moving the device. Furthermore, also multi-wire traces can be ironed in the same manner. But let us see how the ironing process works in detail and talk about how the material spools are constructed. So the iron-on material stack basically consists of 3 layers: a carrier layer, a functional layer, and an adhesive layer. The first layer serves as a carrier for all iron-on spools and is made of heat-resistive baking paper that we coated with sticky glue. The most important part of our spools is the functional layer that consists of materials like ultra-thin conductive fabrics. Most spool materials are fabricated with a vinyl or laser cutter, but as we will see later, it's also possible to integrate rollable printed electronic or even sandwich materials. The last adhesive layer is made of fusible web that is bonded with the functional layer. We transferred all designs to the carrier layer and rolled it onto spools. But how can we continue multi-traces in different directions? To do so, angles and crossings can be realized by placing and ironing a connector stencil, peeling off its protection layer, and sketching again above with an inserted trace spool. We also fabricated stretchable traces as well as shielded ones made of ultra-thin fabrics. Besides the different trace spools, we further present material spools with isolation, conductive, or resistive materials that allow designers to directly iron on versatile circuits and sensor arrangements onto the fabrics. In addition, we introduced zip-on connections as exchangeable mechanisms for multiple purposes, like detaching electronic parts before washing or changing models depending on the context. As composition techniques, our approach supports the arrangement of different spools side by side, the layering of tapes and patches, as well as the utilization of textile accessories. So far, we've learned to manage wiring, right? But what about further input, output, and computing components? With our work, we also introduce a comprehensive library of components, which are mostly realized as functional patches to be ironed on on the same manner. So basically, it is possible to integrate prefabricated iron-on patches in a versatile way. For example, a designer can place an identification patch, then iron the tag using our rapid iron-on tool, and finally peel off the protection layer. As you can see in the video, the result is a flexible and strongly connected tag that could be used, for instance, inside a lab coat for access control. To demonstrate the versatility of our toolkit, we also implemented applications for ubiquitous and variable computing, including a solar-powered smart bag with integrated lighting, a moisture sensor, and music controls at the shoulder pad. Finally, we conducted technical experiments as well as hands-on sessions and reviews with fashion, textile, and fiber experts. The expert reviews provide us insights into the design workflow and allow us to discuss technical parameters such as the required knowledge and costs, as well as the degree of integration, functionality, and durability. As Frederick already said, further informations are available online. So please check out the ACM Digital Library. It's free as an open access download. And with that, thank you for your attention. If you're interested in more details and building instructions, please check out our project webpage. And with that, I am now looking forward to discussing the work in the upcoming question and answer sessions. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Constantine. Really exciting work. And as I mentioned before, this paper received an honorable mention award at CHI this year. I usually would now say, please post your questions on Discord. We seem to be having some small technical problems with Discord. We're trying to get that fixed. If you have any questions and you can post, please do so. Otherwise, feel free maybe to send questions on Twitter to the ACM ISS Twitter account. But for now, we will go to the last talk in the session, which is again also an invited talk from Kai, and it will be presented by Gareth Tigwell about household surface interactions. Gareth, if you'd like to share your screen, and please take it from here.
Cool, thank you. So I'm Gareth Tigwell from the Rochester Institute of Technology, and I'm going to be presenting the paper called Household Surface Interactions, Understanding User Input Preferences and Perceived Home Experiences. So the main message that I want you to take away from this research is that surface texture can provide an enhanced user experience during interaction. And there's a long history of augmented reality research, but we know little about the intersection between touch gestures and surface material textures. So please refer to the paper for more details on a discussion around the related literature. So we used the Sony Xperia Touch Projector, which is a portable augmented reality projector to turn ordinary surfaces interactive, and it's available to the public. So we ran a mixed method study to find out the role that texture plays in user experience during the interaction and what limitations that people saw if they were to try and use this device in their own home. So we call this household surface interactions, or HSI. And we had two main research questions. What surface characteristics do users find pleasant or uncomfortable to interact with? And does a link exist between touch gesture and the surface used for interaction? And the second one was, what challenges do users perceive exist when using HSI within their home, and where are the opportunities for future smart home integration? So the strangest thing that we did during this project was actually have to go to different stores for various materials that you'd find in the home. We really tried hard to get the fake grass to work, but the projector that we had access to didn't really play well with it. So we settled for 9 materials. There were 3 types of carpet, which is on the top row, 3 tiles or slate on the middle row, and 3 kinds of acrylic or wood that's on the bottom. And this image on the screen is just showing those surfaces with a colorful projection, just so that you get an idea of the different reflectivity and the different textures, such as the grain of wood. So we made participants use 5 common gestures, which were tapping, dragging, holding, pinching, and swiping. And we had 2 variations of each. So for example, dragging vertical and dragging horizontal. So participants had to do 10 trials in a random order for each surface. And after the trials on one surface, they would answer some questions on their experience, and then they would repeat it again for a new surface. And the surface materials order was counterbalanced as well. The participants then took part in a final interview. So we ran some quantitative analysis on the data as well, but I'll encourage you to look at the paper for that. And I want to focus more on the qualitative data. So interestingly, we found that surfaces rated as easiest to complete touch gestures on, or the surface that was the most easy, is the one on the screen. So it was a dark wooden surface, which has some amount of texture rather than a completely smooth surface that we're maybe more familiar with the screens of our devices. And we did have a surface, an acrylic surface in our study that was very similar to that. So that kind of surprised us. But most interesting was the variability in the preferences between participants. So we need to balance this desired texture with image clarity. And image clarity with projections and different surface textures isn't really a new finding. But what is kind of taking it into consideration with what people do enjoy interacting with. So some people really enjoyed the soft texture of the carpet, but the softest carpet was also most illegible. So this seems like a problem, but when we consider different tasks that we could potentially do in certain contexts, it's maybe not as big a deal. So if, for example, if you have a young child wanting to do some painting on the carpet without real paint, then they can do that with light instead. They don't need to see that fine level of detail. Whereas if you were trying to read a web page or something or an email, then it's not really suitable. That surface wouldn't be very suitable for that task. So our participants found that texture was both a positive and a negative experience. For some materials like carpet, there's a dynamic interference if the fibers are too long. So although it may be pleasant to touch, it wasn't always practical. P3 talked about having to try and smooth out the carpet to improve the interaction. And this sounds bad, but softer textures were also appealing. And actually could further enhance the experience, so much so that you could forget the material itself that you were interacting with wasn't even connected to the device. Like it's just carpet. And this is demonstrated, like P24 said that the button press seemed more realistic as a result of this softer material. Another example of bridging the physical and the digital worlds together was given by P7, who found when interacting on wood, it felt like you're interacting with it instead of just touching the surface. So this added texture and sometimes 3D surfaces as well could increase a positive user experience through ergonomics. And this Sony device that we used has a battery as well. So it's something that can be moved around the home and tried on different surfaces. And so we got participants to also reflect on their own homes and whether their homes had enough surfaces that they would actually want to interact with. And they came up with some interesting use cases, such as in the kitchen while cooking. So I'll just again recommend that you read the paper for a more detailed discussion on the implications of this work and our ideas for going forward. But I just want to summarize a few points. So people have different preferences for interaction types on different surfaces. Material detection technology exists, and it could be used to adapt the system interactions to the preferences of the user for particular materials. Household surface interaction can improve where current devices are falling short. So, for example, we can explore educational sensory learning activities. And our homes are busy places, so more work needs to look at maintaining the usefulness throughout the day. So, for example, lighting changes throughout the day. And one funny example from participant 24 described how their cat would be very interested in it. And we sometimes find our pets, or especially particularly cats, when trying to type on keyboards and things like that. So this is supposed to make our home environment more interactive. Then these are kind of challenges that we need to think about as well. And so we do have some way to improve these experiences, but the technology is at a place where we can still influence its development before it becomes the norm. And with that, I'll say thank you. And you can use the QR code to link to the paper.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Gareth. Round of applause for Gareth, and also a round of applause now for all the presenters so far. We will now be switching to the Q&A session. In case you haven't noticed, Discord, you might be having issues connecting to Discord, it's not your fault. Discord has what seems to be a global issue, which they've posted on their website. I'm sure they're working on it, but we won't be able to get your questions on there. So if you have any questions for the presenters, please post them here in the Zoom chat, and we will hopefully be able to get to answer them. I think it would be nice if all the presenters would be able to turn on their video so we can see everyone before when we now jump into the question. So let's start with questions. Let's just go in the order of presentations. The first question is by Joachim for Maria for FlexCR. And the question was whether this could be extended to multiple participants. It might be, for example, interesting in a debugging collaborative setting. And you also, I think a bit within that, it might be, you mentioned that it doesn't scale to a bigger number of objects. So whether you could discuss a bit what it needs to scale for multiple users, but also for a larger number of objects.
Okay, so thank you for both questions. So first, for the number of users, for now it's only for one user, but because we are using a server client architecture, it would not be very hard to extend it to support multiple users. And then we would have to also extend the visualization of the results and be able to encode the different participants in the state machine. But it could be extendable, and it's interesting video of future work. And regarding the scalability, it varies a lot across devices. For example, for the HoloLens one, it's the case where it works worst with a big number of objects, because we are relying on web technology and web VR for now, so it still has some performance problems. And to be in desktop, it works mostly at 60 frames per second with big numbers of objects also. But to extend this and to make it better, we could use change of rendering techniques. We are using, for example, pretty mostly basic rendering techniques where we handle one object individually. So we can use like a particle system or more progressive rendering techniques to make it scale. Yes, in the worst cases like the HoloLens.
All right, great. And another question, so I saw in the video, we saw, or in the interface, we saw that you were using raw JSON files instead of, for example, editing the parameters directly on the visual interface, for example, through direct manipulation, or just even having a text input box. Was there a specific design choice behind that?
It was a design choice to be able to share it easily, but after that we did the experiments. Some participants mentioned this, so we implemented a visual interface that works as a form, but it is not visible in the video. But we have some text inputs to make it easier and to prevent errors mostly, so they can select from the predefined values.
All right, great. And so if I wanted to use FlexCR now, is that available to download? Are you going to make that open source?
Yes, we will make it open source. Just now I'm migrating from WebVR to WebXR because we were just in the middle of a big change. But once that is done, I will put it online. It will be open source.
All right, great, perfect. Then let's move on to collaborative tabletops with blind people, for blind people. And there were a couple of questions. Nick MacLeod asked what could be good strategies for increasing workspace awareness of partially sighted participants. Are there maybe ways to combine auditory feedback with emphasis on visual feedback? And I think I would add to the question, what about settings where we have a mix of sighted and non-sighted participants?
Okay, thank you. Those are very two interesting questions. For this stage, we only consider blind users because that would make designing interactions easier. But yeah, combining blind users and normal visual users is definitely something that should be done in future. And I think a mix of auditory feedback and visual feedback might be a good choice. Although blind users have needs that it's not only to know which kind of objects our users interacted with, is also what areas they are exploring with. So normal visual users would not have that kind of requirements. They can see where the arm and the hand is, and this also applies for partially sighted participants. So there are some kind of feedback that we don't need to necessarily extend from blind users to other types of users, because they can have a grasp of the physical world around them. But for other things, for more specific things, yeah, I think that auditory feedback combined with enhanced visual feedback can be a good way to go.
Thank you. And in terms of, or in regards about the actual feedback, what was actually what the participants heard or what the users would hear? Was it a text description saying your finger is currently hovering a circle? Or what was the actual feedback?
They would listen to something like that, but very simplified. So they would listen square, circle, and feedback like that when they touched. They only hear complete sentences when they selected all the targets or something like that. That would give them a complete message. But the feedback for the objects were just the name of the object. And
how were participants' hands tracked when they were hovering the table?
We used depth cameras using the Creepy Tracker toolkit, which is a work of ours as well that we published 3 years ago, I guess, in ISS. So it combines information from multiple depth cameras, and the toolkit gives us the information as a single tracker. So that's what we used.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Autogrip and Gareth Barnaby. We have two Gareths here on the panel. So there was a question from Joachim. Well, actually two questions. How well does the leap motion work under variable illumination, and can you move this out of the tabletop?
Great, thanks for the question. So the leap motion itself has like IR LEDs in it, so it works based on infrared cameras. So it throws out its own light, so in theory it should be fine. I can't say I've ever tested it in the dark to any kind of scientific means, but in theory it should be fine. In terms of Autogrip out in the wild, I guess, we've only tested it in desktop force feedback devices so far, but the Autogrip itself should be fine to go on pretty much anything. So not really limited to a tabletop, wherever you can screw it down, I guess.
All right. And another question, a bit more about technical details, sort of how strong can the force feedback be, and how quickly can it switch, and how many different levels of strength can you apply?
Okay, so in terms of the force it can apply, we can do pretty much anything a force feedback device can do. We've not managed to break one yet. Sorry, what were the other two?
How quickly the feedback can change. So how quick, whether you could have like a fast vibration, or whether it's more on the it takes a couple of seconds to change.
Yeah, so that's something we hadn't actually looked at with our work with it so far. It's just for attaching the device to the finger. We don't do any active feedback through Autogrip itself. So that'll be limited to the haptic device you've attached it to. It is something we're actually actively looking at for future works.
Right.
And sorry, the final part again?
The final one was how many different levels of feedback it could get, whether is that a linear or is it only on and off?
Okay, so in terms of attaching, it's very, very adaptable. So you can give it essentially like a volume control for how hard it will grip. So it's pretty much infinitely variable on the strength of the grip.
Okay, and one last question. So I understand that the frames that carry the Autogrip, or that attach the Autogrip to your fingers, they're a previous project of yours called Mantis. And we've seen a few of the videos, and I'm wondering about like portability, and a bit covers also with what Joachim asked, but how about the big one we saw in the video where you're standing in the room around you? How easily and how quickly can that be packed up?
So the devices themselves, so you screw onto a table. So it's two screws, you pull it off and you can walk off carrying it. Right. So as long as you've got something to attach it to, it's very easy to set up quickly and tear down quickly. So in terms of like the demos we do, we run like the multi-point demos with two of these devices at once. It takes longer to set up the laptop and the virtual reality than the haptic side.
Right, great. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Constantine and the rapid iron-on user interfaces. So you mentioned that you talked to design experts and I think to fabric experts, but I think this approach really also lends itself to make smart textile design available to the masses. Could you maybe talk a bit about how non-technical users or how non-professional designers could use these rapid iron-on interfaces, and yeah, or whether you have even given it to some non-expert users?
Yes, this is a really good question. Thanks for that. We think about to empower designers and young makers and stuff like that. And Beakley and colleagues lay the foundations with a lily pad, and you have the sewing stuff, and everybody knows it. But I think it's really a promising time in printed electronics, getting new materials, and we have this iron-on stuff already. And we were thinking about how we can prefabricate and use it as a direct tool. So we combine basically an iron with a dispenser tool and have some cool prefabricated rolls in mind that you can grab it from a store like today, the yarns or something like that. And then you are able to prototype versatile things like capacitive sensing stuff or traces or electroluminescent stuff. And I think this is a huge space, an underexplored space that we have to tackle with all the promising technologies and materials that came up that we can iron on. And we take the first step with this tool. We speak, as you mentioned, with fashion designers as well as fiber experts to get some hands-on sessions, but we have to investigate it with really large workshop groups or maker workshops in the future work.
All right, great, thank you. Well, I'm also wondering a bit about recyclability and, for example, if you iron a circuit on and you realize you have a short circuit or you want to completely get rid of it, you have to throw away the entire t-shirt. Can you easily peel it off? Does it rub off?
This is a good question. We support somehow the undo action because it's heat activated fusible web. We can use a rapid iron-on tool without a spool. So it's just like an iron, and we can go above the traces, heat them up, and then peel it up again. So basically everything that you iron on is with enough heat also possible to peel it up. And what I want to mention here, it's not a tool for large-scale professional e-textiles. It's for prototyping. So it supports rapid circuits and also the undo action with heat.
And how about if you want to wash it? Is that washable, or is that just something that's for later for large-scale production?
Yeah, I think the prior work shows that some fusible webs are washable at low temperatures, but I think it's not our main goal and focus to focus on these technical washability aspects, because for first prototypes, if you imagine a fashion designer wants to build something, maybe the first thing is not to support a good washability because it's about the prototype. I think it is somehow washable, but if you go to large-scale production, I think there are methods to weave into the fabrics that are washable. So it depends actually on the components that you ironed on. Some are better, some are not so good.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And let's move on to Gareth Tigwell and the household surface interactions. We have a question from Sohail Kinsat. Can you reflect on the user experience of the users for some interactions like clicking on a button, more particular on the haptic feedback while interacting with different surfaces?
So it's a great question. I guess I just want to give a little bit more context first before kind of getting to that question. just because it was quite a short presentation. But so the surfaces, they're ordinary materials that aren't digital. And I just want to explain kind of how the projector was working. So the projector beams the light down onto the surface. And if you've got this box that's sitting there, it fires an infrared beam horizontally. So it detects the finger making contact with that surface. So that's kind of how it works in as much as like the material being unconnected in any way. It's quite clever. And also just to give a bit of context for the participants, so 31 participants had some level of experience with AR. So they were familiar with augmented reality, but actually none of them had used a system like this before. So kind of to go back to the question, I think that partly it went really above and beyond their expectations that something could work this way. And even, I mean, when I was getting familiar with using the system, it's amazing how convincing it is, and you forget like that the surface isn't part of this whole setup and device. So I think like the other thing is when we consider the devices that we use, we're used to interacting with a really hard surface. Most of our devices like smartphones tend to have a glass screen or a really hard plastics display. So when you go to press a button on something like that, you normally expect resistance. And, you know, maybe a designer might try and mimic the button going in using kind of drop shadows and things like that. But often how we interact with our devices, there's a very solid surface to interact with. And so I think like when it became the softer materials and their finger could keep going through, and when it was, you know, when it happened to be something like the tapping interaction and it kind of reminded them of like pressing a button, that's kind of, I think where that kind of came around. I think that just to give another example of this kind of materials and haptic and this experience, some participants really enjoyed dragging when the direction followed the grain of wood as well. So I think one participant described it as kind of accelerating their action. So, which is good. You could then carefully choose certain materials with certain interactions to make that experience better. But I guess also as a warning there is we had two different types of wood and they had different patterns of grain. And so sometimes when someone had to drag across the, that wasn't following the grain, like some people were fine with it and others felt that it added too much kind of texture that it was distracting. So yeah, I think there's still a lot to explore here, and there's like an interesting kind of psychological thing going on as well.
And I think one last question just on top of that is, I noticed that you use the Sony Xperia Touch, which is a portable device. And you mentioned the different surfaces that they trigger different experiences by the user. And so is there any way of detecting what kind of material you have in front of the projector so that, for example, the interface could adapt?
That's a really great question, and we discussed this in the paper for future work. So this projector is not very smart. You basically put it down on a surface, and all it does is detect whether your finger breaks that infrared light that's being fired out at a horizontal angle. So it doesn't know what material it's on. And we actually, and again, the paper kind of mention this a little bit more, we had to 3D print various mounts so that some of the thicker materials that we wanted people to interact with weren't just stopping that beam. So we had to play around so that we could get it perfectly matched to then actually do the study that we were interested in doing. But there's Radar Cat is, I think, I forget where that was published, but the reference is in the paper anyway. And that uses some sort of radar machine learning to do material detection. So we actually talk about this as in the discussion for potential future work, where if we paired this kind of not very smart device with something like that, that when you put it on different surfaces, it can detect what those surfaces are. And then if the user has maybe done some sort of calibration effort where they indicate that they like dragging on carpet, but they don't like dragging on wood. If you think of like a music app with controls for volume, and usually you drag the control to increase the volume or decrease it. If that material that's detected and the system knows you don't like dragging on that material, it could remap the control to like just a plus or minus so that you can tap instead. So yeah, I think there's a lot to explore here.
Great, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for all your answers. And that concludes this session. Let's give another round of applause to all the presenters in this session. Thank you very much for all the questions you had, and thank you very much for all the answers you gave. If you still have questions, you can get in touch with the authors on Discord, which seems to be slowly coming back. I seem to be getting notifications again, so maybe try and connecting. There's also an audio channel called Session 2 After Chat where you can go and hang out if you have further questions. Or you use this coffee break now to bring your own coffee, head over to Hubbub and enjoy this virtual coffee break. Put on your headphones and listen around and walk around in the virtual space. And in about 55 minutes, we then have our first keynote, and we'll hopefully see you all there. Thank you very much.